Alright guys, we just finished trimming off the excess clay down here at the bottom, and we took off a little bit of the rim. I showed you how to do that. I just saw that I got a little bit of water down here in the bottom of my form, so I'm just going to dry that up, because this might be one of the last opportunities you have. Think about drying that up, especially if you're going to close the form on the top at all. What you have down in the bottom, if there's any water down there, you might seal it off, and you really don't want to leave a bunch of water down in the bottom of your form. So what I'm going to talk about first is called bellying out. I'm bellying the piece. There's a couple of techniques you can use for it. And I just remembered I got to grab one of these bellying spoons. Okay, so we got this guy. This is a fancy tool. It's a stick with a knob at the end of it. Basically what you use this for is to get down in areas where you can't normally get with your hands and push. Because what bellying is adding a belly to the form or pushing on the inside until the form makes its way out to where you want it. So we start with a medium point in between, and then we push. So the first thing I'm going to do is make sure that it's wet only on the inside. I don't need to continue adding water to the outside of my form. In fact, I'm going to try not to drip any water on the outside of my form, because when I collar, I'm going to show you a cool way to collar that's going to change how you do stuff. So I'm getting the inside of the form wet, drying up some of the water that collects in the bottom, wringing that back out. I don't want a bunch of water sitting on the bottom. So first I'm going to show you by just pushing with the inside hand, push slowly, that you'll start to see a change in the form. I'm just working my way up and down and pushing on the inside of the form with my fingers. So if you can see my inside fingers, they're doing this. You can see where the clay has piled up on my fingers from where I'm pushing. And I'm just kind of moving up and down, and I'm keeping an eye on the contour. And I really have to sit far back in my chair to see that that form is starting to work its way out. I'm going to stop there, and I'll show you this tool. This is so you can get down even deeper in your form. And yes, you should still make sure it's wet, but you can actually use this to press from the interior, because sometimes you just can't get down in those hard to reach spots. And you can really belly that out significantly. Now you start to see that form start to happen, and it does take a little bit of practice. It's going to feel really unnatural at first to hold the stick while we push from the interior, but you'll get used to it right away. Move slow. Okay, and that's that. So that's bellying out, and you can belly out from any part on the form. I'm going to get in here and just dry up some of this excess water, because now we're going to talk about collaring in. Collaring in, there's a couple ways to do it. One way is you wet your hands, and I can actually show you. So we're going to screw up the outside of my piece. I was trying to keep it dry so I could show you a different technique. Wet your hands, and what you're going to do is just choke the piece in and move up. Okay, so in where you want it to start coming in, and then bring your hands up. Seen some people use their fingertips. You got to keep everything wet. If it starts to get grippy, re-wet it right away. And that's one method of collaring in, is to keep pushing and pushing like that. You know, I like that. I like that, and you should definitely try it. But what I'm going to do next is scrape down all the slip off the outside of my piece and dry the outside of my form. This is a technique that I was shown by Bob Wilson, who taught me a lot about throwing. You see, all I'm doing is just scraping all the slip off the outside, and I kind of want this piece to be a little more dry. We talk about dryness and wetness a lot, and using different types of clay to see what works best for you. And I think it's important to try throwing with wet clay, and then try throwing with a little bit drier clay. You know, purposefully let your clay dry out. First time I'm going to use this torch. These are very simple tools. You press the button and fire comes out the end. The only way to really hurt yourself on these is to aim the fire at yourself. It's a very safe tool otherwise, but be aware that anything you point it at will get very hot very quickly. Alright, so I'm just going to dry the outside of this piece a little bit. Just a very little bit. I don't want to dry it all the way because then it won't be flexible. I'm just checking to make sure that I got rid of all the moisture and there's no wet spots. Okay, good. Happy with that. So this collaring technique is a one-finger dry throwing technique where you start where you want the piece to start coming in and you just start to push with, and I mean a very little tiny corner of your finger. And so I'm pushing, I'm pushing, I'm pushing, and I come all the way up to the top. Don't get your finger wet if there's slip up at the top. Then I will work my finger back down, pushing and pushing and pushing until I get down to that shoulder of the piece, and then I'm going to slowly let off pressure. And reverse that and come back up. And we really do need 100% dryness for this to work. And I say dry, but you know what I mean. I don't mean dry clay. I mean no visible slip on the outside of the clay. And then back down to the shoulder. Now, if this clay down here was really wet, do you think it would be able to support this? There's no way. This whole thing would collapse on itself. So if this part isn't kind of dry down here, don't attempt this because you're putting a lot of stress on it, and this whole tube of clay up here really wants to fall down. Now as I'm doing this, you can see the little indent that I'm creating, and that is slowly but surely pressing this clay form in further and further. Well, where do you think all that clay is going? Well, some of it's going up. This is getting taller in here. But a lot of it's being compacted. So I need to pull this wall up a little bit. All right? That means I have to wet the inside of the form, but not get any water on the outside. So I'm just going to use my left hand, and I'm going to get this sponge. And be careful not to drip on the outside. And I'm just going to wet this little top cylinder so that I can pull that wall up a little bit. Get in there with my finger and do a little mini wall pull. Taller and taller and taller. And what I'm doing is I'm thinning out the clay that I basically just forced all to scrunch up in the middle. Alright, and it's just dampen it. Don't let it drip on there. Don't let it drip. This is your last chance really to do this. You can see how narrow that's starting to get. Get a little bit of clay at the bottom. And bring it up, bring it up, bring it up. Don't lose it. Don't lose it. But you want to thin it out. Okay. So that got a little bit taller, and now I'm going right back into my wall pulls with my dry hand. Or not wall pulls, I'm sorry. We're going to call these collaring pulls. Come right back down. The less contact you make with the clay at this phase, the better. So I am just using a very little bit of pressure and a very little bit of contact with my finger. And this is actually pulling the wall upward. I don't know if you can tell. And there's a little grippy spot here, so I'm going to do my best. I might end up having to cut that off. Let's see, it's trying to get really grabby up here because that little whatever it is trying to catch my finger every time I come up past it. And at this stage I'm kind of using a a fingernail. I think I'm actually going to cut off the top part of this rim here just to make my life a little bit easier. Never be afraid to do that. You can see how thick it is. So now I can come back in with a little bit more confidence. And it takes a while. This is about patience. Okay, so now I'm going to continue to thin that. We'll go back to my other collaring technique, because I'm only really going to be able to work from the outside here. And really press that in and lift. And you're going to feel some torsion up here in the top. It's important to recompress. As long as I can get one finger in here, I can recompress the walls a little bit. Let's try that again. Now really the question is, how far do you want to go? How far do you want to continue to thin this form? Because as you know, the taller it gets, the harder it's going to be to keep this guy at the top centered. So now I'm just pulling a little bit at the top, thinning this out. Keep this a little bit wet up here so I can work with it. Push this rim back down a little bit. And you see it starts to get a little bit off center, and you just recenter it. You're going to want to grab onto your fingers and take advantage. Right, if you keep it wet and you stay steady, you shouldn't have any problems, really. See how far we can open this form up. And there's a little magic genie lamp. Okay. All right. So that is my best bellying and collaring in. Single finger dry shape, and then I'm going to scrape off some of the slip. And always think about shaping my form. In the next video, we'll talk more about that.